It was a calm Tuesday evening in Washington, D.C., and the political atmosphere was charged. The tension was palpable as the highly anticipated live debate between Pam Bondi, the United States Attorney General and well-known liberal TV host, Thomas Reynolds, was about to begin. The debate was set to air on national television, and both parties had been preparing for weeks, eager to make their mark in front of the viewing audience. Pam Bondi had become a familiar face in the Trump administration, known for her fiery rhetoric and sharp legal mind. She had long been a defender of the president's policies, and her legal background gave her an edge that many opponents couldn't match. Despite her poised exterior, she was also known for her ability to deliver cutting remarks with perfect timing. Tonight, she was ready for a showdown. On the other side of the ring was Thomas Reynolds, a staunch liberal TV host known for his biting commentary and sharp criticism of the Trump administration. He had spent years criticizing the president's policies, calling for change, and rallying his audience against what he described as the corrupt regime. Reynolds was no stranger to political debates and was confident in his ability to outwit anyone who came his way. But he had never encountered someone like Pam Bondi. As the cameras rolled, the moderators introduced the two debaters. The audience was already on edge, knowing that the clash between these two would be nothing short of explosive. Bondi entered the stage first, walking confidently to her podium. Dressed in a professional yet stylish suit, her every step exuded authority. She waved briefly to the audience, her smile polite but reserved. Reynolds entered next, waving to the crowd with exaggerated enthusiasm, clearly relishing the spotlight. His oversized glasses gleamed under the stage lights, and he flashed a grin as he positioned himself at his podium. The audience erupted into applause, but the real action was about to begin. The moderators briefly outlined the format for the evening, giving the floor to each debater to make their opening statements. Reynolds went first, standing tall and adjusting his glasses as he addressed the camera. "Good evening, America. Tonight, I'm here to discuss the disastrous policies of this administration and how they're driving our country into the ground. From mishandling the pandemic to weakening the very foundations of our democracy, this administration has proven time and time again that it is not fit to lead." The audience clapped as Reynolds continued his tirade, his voice rising in intensity. Pam Bondi listened intently, her face a mask of composure. She had heard it all before, but she was determined to stay calm and collected. When it was her turn to speak, she wasted no time. She began, her tone cool but cutting. "I'm here tonight to talk about the facts. Under President Trump's leadership, we've seen record-low unemployment, a booming economy, and a secure border. But of course, those facts don't fit the narrative you like to peddle." Reynolds smirked, clearly prepared for a battle. "Facts, huh? Let's see what you have, Pam." Bondi continued, her voice growing stronger. "Let's talk about the economy. Under President Trump, we've seen job growth like never before. The stock market has soared, and America has become the envy of the world. Meanwhile, your side is still trying to push policies that would destroy everything we've worked for." Reynolds cut in. "Job growth, Pam? You really want to talk about job growth when millions of people are still out of work, struggling to make ends meet?" Bondi's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. "Thomas, I'm sorry, but I think you're confusing your talking points. The unemployment rate is at historic lows. And while we're on the subject, let's not forget that the pandemic wasn't exactly planned. But despite the challenges, President Trump stepped up to ensure that Americans got the relief they needed." The audience murmured in agreement, and Reynolds' face began to tighten. He wasn't expecting Bondi to hit back so quickly. He had hoped to dominate the debate from the start, but now he was starting to feel the pressure. Bondi leaned forward slightly, her smile widening as she saw Reynolds trying to regain his composure. "You know, Thomas," she said, her tone almost teasing, "I've heard a lot of your speeches, and you're great at telling people what they want to hear. But the truth is, your side can't seem to handle the truth." Reynolds was caught off guard. Bondi wasn't just defending the president's record. She was attacking his. "This is what you do, isn't it, Pam?" Reynolds snapped. "You're all about deflecting and dodging the real issues. You talk about the economy, but what about the environment? What about healthcare? What about the countless Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck, barely able to survive? Bondi's grin grew wider, but her eyes narrowed, almost as if she were savoring the moment. Thomas, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, I have to hand it to you. You've spent so much time peddling these ideas, you probably believe them yourself. But let's talk about healthcare for a second. Under the Affordable Care Act, premiums skyrocketed, and the system became a nightmare. But now, thanks to President Trump, we've introduced policies that actually help the American people. Reynolds sputtered. You call that help? You're denying Americans the right to affordable healthcare. Bondi didn't miss a beat. Affordable healthcare? Maybe if you actually understood the market, you'd realize that the only people benefiting from the ACA were the bureaucrats and the insurance companies. The audience was now fully engaged, hanging on every word. Bondi's controlled confidence had the crowd captivated, and Reynolds was starting to look increasingly rattled. He had come to this debate expecting to challenge Bondi at every turn, but he was finding it much harder than he anticipated. And just when he thought it couldn't get any worse, Pam Bondi delivered her first hilarious roast. It came out of nowhere, a perfect jab that left everyone in the room, and at home, laughing. The audience held their breath, watching as Pam Bondi's eyes twinkled with mischief. She leaned slightly toward her microphone, her voice almost conspiratorial, but the words she spoke hit hard. Thomas, I get it, she said, feigning a sympathetic tone. You've spent so much time trying to sound like you have all the answers, but, it's okay. Not everyone can be as successful as President Trump. The room went quiet for a split second, and then, like a bombshell, the audience erupted into laughter. Reynolds's face reddened, and he quickly adjusted his glasses, trying to regain his composure. Bondi wasn't done. She smiled sweetly, as if she had just delivered the most innocent remark, and continued, I mean, really, Thomas, I know you've been busy with your liberal rants on TV, but have you seen your own ratings? Maybe that's why you're so angry. You can't even beat reruns of Friends. The crowd roared with laughter again, and even the moderators had to stifle their smiles. Reynolds, clearly flustered, tried to brush it off, but it was clear the roast had landed. The cameras zoomed in on his increasingly tense face as he adjusted his posture, looking like a man caught off guard by the unexpected punch. Bondi wasn't about to let up. Look, I understand. When you've spent your whole career yelling at a screen, sometimes you forget what real work looks like. But don't worry, Thomas. We'll take it easy on you tonight. I'm sure we can find a nice liberal corner somewhere where you can resume your broadcasting career. Laughter filled the studio once more, and Reynolds was now visibly rattled. He hadn't anticipated that Bondi would come at him with humor so sharp, so quick, that it left him momentarily speechless. He had always prided himself on being quick-witted, but tonight, he was the one being roasted. He could feel the heat. Trying to recover, Reynolds cleared his throat and shot back. Well, Pam, I guess you're right. I've got a long career ahead of me, whereas you've got a seat at the table with one of the most divisive presidents in modern history. Bondi's smile never faltered. Oh, Thomas, sweetheart, let me remind you that it was your side that tried to make a career out of dividing this country. We, on the other hand, are busy creating jobs, securing our borders, and actually making America great again. But I'll tell you what, you're right about one thing, we're definitely in the same boat. We're both working for a living, but at least one of us is working for the good of the American people. The audience clapped loudly, the applause drowning out Reynolds's response. The liberal TV host's face twisted with frustration, and Bondi could see the shift in his demeanor. He was no longer the confident debater he had been just moments ago. The wind had been taken out of his sails. Bondi leaned into the microphone, her voice softer now, but with a hint of playful mockery. Thomas, you're probably the kind of guy who goes on and on about policies, but when it comes time to actually get things done, you're nowhere to be found. It's easy to criticize from your comfy TV chair, but out here in the real world, we're doing the work that actually matters. The audience chuckled at the jab, and Reynolds struggled to find his footing. He had expected a straightforward political debate, But what he didn't anticipate was Bondi turning the tables with her biting humor and unrelenting charm. Reynolds was visibly rattled now, and he had no choice but to try and regain control. Well, Pam, if you're so proud of your work, let's talk about the most recent scandal involving the Trump administration, your president's involvement with the Russian government. What do you say to that, The Russian interference in our elections. Bondi's expression turned serious, but the glint in her eye was unmistakable. Ah, Thomas, always going back to that tired old narrative. Look, if we're going to talk about scandals, let's not pretend that your side has a spotless record either. You talk about Russia like it's the end of the world, but I'd suggest you take a good look at your own backyard. If anyone's been colluding with foreign powers, I think we both know where to point the finger. Reynolds opened his mouth to respond, but for once, he was at a loss for words. The sharpness of Bondi's retort had caught him off guard. He could feel his nerves beginning to show, but he wasn't going to let this debate slip away without a fight. Bondi continued, her voice laced with irony. But let's be honest, Thomas. You're much better at pointing fingers than actually doing anything to solve the real problems facing our country. You can sit behind your desk, reading off a script, but we're out here getting things done. Reynolds's face was now a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He wasn't sure whether to continue pushing the Russia narrative or to shift gears entirely. But Pam Bondi wasn't giving him a chance to recover. In the blink of an eye, she had gone from delivering facts to throwing punches with perfect timing. Each remark was a carefully crafted roast that took Reynolds off balance, and the audience could hardly contain their laughter. At this point, the moderators exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen a debate quite like this before. Bondi was running circles around Reynolds, and it wasn't even close. Look, Thomas, Bondi said, suddenly sounding sympathetic again. I know you've got a tough job, trying to convince America that you know better than the rest of us. But don't worry, we all have our moments. Yours just happened to be a little, well, let's say, misinformed. Another round of laughter echoed through the studio, and Reynolds's cheeks burned with humiliation. He tried to keep his composure, but it was clear that Bondi had won the round. The moderator quickly stepped in, sensing the growing tension. All right, let's move on to the next topic. But it was already too late. The damage had been done, and Pam Bondi had scored her first major victory of the night, one that no one in the room would forget. The debate continued, but the atmosphere had undeniably shifted. Pam Bondi's unexpected humor had taken the air out of Thomas Reynolds' sails, and while he tried to compose himself, the damage was already done. The audience had already seen how effective she could be, not just as a politician, but as a master of rhetoric, sharp, witty, and relentless. And though Reynolds had prepared for a political battle, he was now fighting for his dignity. The moderators, sensing that the debate needed to move forward, quickly pivoted to the next topic. Let's move on, they announced, to the matter of immigration policy. Mr. Reynolds, we'll start with you. Reynolds, who was still trying to regain his footing, took a deep breath and turned his attention to the next topic. Thank you. Immigration is one of the most critical issues facing America today. We are a nation built on diversity, but the current administration has turned its back on those seeking refuge. The Trump administration's policies are not only cruel, but also completely disregard the values that America was founded on. The audience seemed to murmur in agreement with Reynolds, though some could still feel the aftershocks of Bondi's earlier barbs. She, on the other hand, was listening intently, her posture calm, and her hands folded neatly on her podium. It was clear she was preparing for her next counterattack. When it was her turn, Bondi stood tall, her face a picture of composure. Thomas, I hear you. I really do. You talk about the values that America was founded on, and yet you seem to forget one very important thing. America has always been about law and order. Our immigration system is broken, and the policies of the Trump administration are aimed at fixing it. Reynolds opened his mouth to interrupt, but Bondi held up a hand, a subtle gesture that stopped him in his tracks. You want to talk about cruelty, Thomas? Maybe we should talk about the human traffickers who use our open borders to exploit innocent people. Maybe we should talk about the drug cartels that flood our country with illegal narcotics. That's the real cruelty, not the efforts to secure our borders and protect American families. The audience grew quiet, sensing the weight of Bondi's words. For the first time tonight, Reynolds looked uncertain. He had anticipated a back and forth over immigration policies, but he hadn't prepared for this direct challenge. Bondi continued, her voice steady and unwavering. We are a nation that welcomes immigrants who follow the rules, who contribute to our economy, and who respect the values that made this country great. But let's not pretend that an open border is a solution. It's a disaster. And to act like it's some kind of moral high ground is nothing short of reckless. Reynolds, desperate to regain control of the debate, shot back, "You're wrong, Pam. What we need is compassion. We need a system that doesn't just prioritize safety but also the basic human rights of those fleeing violence and oppression. Your administration is only interested in using fear to control the narrative." Bondi's lips curled into a smile. Fear? Is that what you're calling the reality of the situation? Because, Thomas, there's nothing fearful about wanting to protect the lives of American citizens. There's nothing cruel about making sure that people who come to this country do so legally, safely, and with the intention to build a better future, not bring chaos. The tension in the room was building again, and Reynolds's frustration was becoming palpable. So what are you saying? That immigrants are criminals? That they don't deserve a chance at a better life? Pam Bondi didn't hesitate. No, Thomas. I'm saying that the illegals who break the law by crossing our borders illegally, those are the ones who need to face the consequences. The ones who come here legally, who follow the process, are the ones who deserve our respect and support. Reynolds sputtered for a moment, trying to form a coherent rebuttal. But the sharpness of Bondi's point had left him speechless. He tried to regain some ground, but every time he opened his mouth, it seemed like Bondi was one step ahead. "Let's be real here, Thomas," Bondi said, her tone now carrying a bit of edge. "You can talk all you want about compassion, but let's not ignore the facts. Illegal immigration costs American taxpayers billions of dollars every year. And yet, you're trying to paint this as some kind of moral high ground. You can't have it both ways." Reynolds could feel the heat rising again. Bondi was not only challenging his views but also turning his arguments into something he couldn't easily counter. The crowd seemed to be warming to her, their applause following her every well-placed jab. It was then that Bondi leaned in a little closer to her microphone, her smile turning sly. "You know, Thomas," she said in a softer, almost teasing voice, "I'm starting to think that your side is more interested in making a political point than actually solving the problems. It's like you're so busy feeling virtuous, you've forgotten about the safety and well-being of the very people you claim to protect." Reynolds's face twitched, and the audience chuckled lightly. Bondi had done it again, used his own words against him with devastating effectiveness. He shot her a look, one that conveyed both frustration and disbelief. How had she managed to turn every one of his arguments into something that worked in her favor? Bondi wasn't done. "And let's not even talk about sanctuary cities. You really think it's a good idea to harbor criminals and put our law enforcement officers at risk? You're asking the American people to trust the very same cities that are refusing to enforce the law. How does that make sense?" Reynolds opened his mouth, but before he could respond, Bondi cut him off with a final, pointed remark. "Thomas, you talk about compassion, but I think the most compassionate thing we can do is ensure that our immigration system is based on fairness and respect for the rule of law. That's what America stands for." The applause that followed was deafening, and Reynolds knew, deep down, that he had just been outplayed again. Bondi's firm, unwavering stance on immigration had left little room for rebuttal. But more than that, her ability to blend serious policy with pointed humor had done what no one else could. She had made him look weak. The moderators, sensing that the topic had been fully exhausted, quickly moved on. But the damage had already been done. The audience was abuzz, and it was clear who had won the round. The debate had already taken a dramatic turn, with Pam Bondi demonstrating a unique blend of sharp political insight and razor-edged humor. As the audience buzzed with excitement, the moderators, sensing that things were heating up, quickly shifted to the next topic: healthcare. Let's move on to the issue of healthcare, the moderator said, trying to bring some order back to the room. Ms. Bondi, we'll start with you this time. What do you think about the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, and the state of healthcare in America under the Trump administration? Bondi took a deep breath, her posture once again radiating calm confidence. The subject of healthcare was an important one, especially given the political implications it had in elections. But Bondi wasn't worried. She had prepared for this moment just as she had prepared for every other topic that night. She smiled, her tone warm but serious. Thank you. Let me start by saying this. The Affordable Care Act was supposed to be a solution, but instead, it's become a mess. Premiums have skyrocketed and many people, especially those in the working class, are finding themselves priced out of insurance. Obamacare was a disaster for Americans, and it's time for something better. Reynolds, not missing a beat, leaned forward. That's easy for you to say, Pam, but what's the alternative? The Trump administration doesn't have a clear plan for healthcare. You can't just take away people's insurance and leave them with nothing. What are you offering as a solution? Bondi gave him a knowing smile, her confidence unwavering. Oh, Thomas, it's clear you've been reading all the liberal talking points. You see, there's this misconception that if you don't go along with Obamacare, you're just abandoning people. But let's be clear, we're not abandoning anyone. We're offering them something much better. More affordable plans, more competition, and more choices. The audience listened attentively, sensing that Bondi was about to lay out her vision. She continued, her voice filled with conviction. The Trump administration has been working on expanding access to healthcare by removing the barriers that Obamacare imposed. We're pushing for competition in the marketplace, which means lower prices for families. The goal isn't to take away people's health insurance, but to make it affordable for everyone. What's the point of offering health insurance that no one can afford? That's just a cruel joke. Reynolds, now visibly frustrated, shot back. But the reality is, Pam, the Affordable Care Act has provided insurance to millions of people who didn't have it before. You can't just dismantle it without offering a viable alternative. And let's not forget the protections it has for people with pre-existing conditions. Bondi nodded, her expression thoughtful, but her voice was firm. Look, I get it. No one wants to see anyone lose their coverage, especially if they're dealing with a serious health issue. But I'm telling you, Thomas, the system we had under Obamacare wasn't sustainable. It was driving up costs for everyone, and the people who needed it the most, middle-class families, were getting stuck with sky-high premiums. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Under the Trump administration's plan, we've made great strides in bringing down costs and increasing competition. We've also worked hard to ensure that no one is left behind. People with pre-existing conditions are still protected, and we're working on expanding coverage. But the key is to make it affordable, not to create a bloated, inefficient system that only benefits insurance companies. The audience, which had been quiet during Reynolds' rebuttal, now seemed to be leaning toward Bondi's argument. Her calm, well-reasoned response had made a strong case, and once again, Reynolds found himself on the defensive. Reynolds didn't give up easily, however. But you're ignoring the fact that millions of Americans rely on the subsidies provided by the Affordable Care Act. Those subsidies are what make insurance affordable for them. Without that support, many people would find themselves unable to afford healthcare. Bondi's smile grew wider. You keep going back to subsidies, Thomas, but let's talk about the real cost to Americans. Subsidies might seem like a good idea, but they're just a band-aid on a much larger problem. They're being paid for by hardworking taxpayers, and in the end, it's the middle class that gets hit the hardest. We need to reform the system, not just throw money at it. Reynolds seemed ready to argue further, but before he could, Bondi took the opportunity to land her final point. And let's not forget, Thomas, the real issue here is about freedom. People should have the right to choose their own healthcare plans, and the Trump administration has worked tirelessly to give them that freedom. The more choices people have, the more they can control their own healthcare decisions, instead of being forced into a one-size-fits-all system like Obamacare. There was a long pause in the room, and the audience began clapping again. Bondi's remarks had been powerful, clear, and, most importantly, difficult to refute. Reynolds, now looking somewhat defeated, gave a small nod but didn't offer any further response. The moderators quickly moved on to the next segment, but the damage had been done. Bondi had once again dismantled Reynolds's arguments with the same deft humor and precise logic that had already made her the star of the evening. The audience was on her side, and it was clear that she had a mastery of not just the facts, but the ability to connect with people on a personal level. As the debate continued, it became increasingly apparent that Bondi wasn't just participating in a political discussion. She was dominating it. The debate had now moved into its final phase, and the tension in the air was palpable. Pam Bondi had undeniably won every round so far. Her blend of political savvy and sharp humor had turned the tables on her opponent at every opportunity. The audience was hanging on her every word, and even Reynolds was starting to look weary, the weight of the evening's exchanges clearly taking its toll. But little did anyone know, Bondi had saved her most devastating blow for last. The topic had shifted to the economy, and Reynolds, knowing he had to hit hard to salvage his credibility, started off strong. The Trump administration's economic policies have benefited the wealthy, he began. Under this president, the rich have gotten richer, while the working class has been left behind. The tax cuts were a giveaway to corporations and the top 1%, while middle-class families have seen little relief. Bondi raised an eyebrow as he spoke, clearly amused. It was the perfect setup, and she couldn't resist. She turned her gaze to the audience, her tone light and teasing. Well, Thomas, let's take a moment to appreciate the irony here. You're talking about the rich getting richer, but it was your party that spent decades pushing policies that kept the rich in power. And now you want to act like the champion of the working class? That's a comedy show in itself. The room erupted into laughter. Even the moderators had a hard time containing their amusement, but Reynolds, unsurprisingly, didn't find it funny. He tried to keep his composure, but the snickers from the crowd made him squirm. Bondi, on the other hand, was just getting started. She leaned in toward the microphone, her voice dropping to a more serious tone, though still laced with her signature humor. Let's be clear, Thomas. The Trump tax cuts weren't just a gift to the wealthy. They were designed to stimulate the economy by lowering corporate taxes, which in turn incentivizes job growth and investment. And guess what? It worked. Unemployment rates hit record lows, wages went up, and the stock market soared. That's not just a win for the rich. That's a win for all Americans. Reynolds shot back quickly. But those benefits haven't been equally shared, Pam. The wealth gap has only grown wider. Bondi didn't miss a beat. Oh, Thomas, I'm so glad you brought up the wealth gap. Because the policies your party supports, tax hikes and excessive government spending, only serve to further widen that gap. High taxes on businesses and job creators don't help the working class. They destroy jobs and make it harder for people to get ahead. But hey, keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? The laughter continued, and this time, even Reynolds couldn't help but crack a smile, though it was more out of frustration than amusement. Bondi had once again turned his attack into an opportunity to reinforce her argument. The audience was in stitches, clearly enjoying the back and forth, but also realizing that Bondi had made her point, once again without breaking a sweat. At this point, the moderators stepped in, trying to bring the debate back to a more serious tone. Let's focus on the broader picture, one of them said, and consider the long-term economic growth. Ms. Bondi, how do you view the Trump administration's approach to future economic policies? Bondi's smile returned, but now there was a hint of pride in her expression. I think the future is bright. With the tax cuts already in place, and with more deregulation happening across industries, we're seeing real growth. America is getting back to being a place where businesses can thrive without being bogged down by the government. The fact is, when you create an environment where entrepreneurs can succeed, everyone benefits. The trickle-down effect is real, and we're seeing it happen now more than ever. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Then, with a sly smile, she added, and for the record, Thomas, I'll say it again. The people who have benefited the most from this economy are not the rich. They're the working Americans who now have more opportunities than ever before. The applause that followed was deafening, and even the moderators couldn't help but smile at the skillful way Bondi had used the moment to not only defend the administration's economic policies, but to deliver a knockout punch to her opponent. Reynolds, clearly frustrated but trying to maintain his composure, gave a quick rebuttal. But there's no denying that the wealthiest Americans have seen the biggest tax breaks. Bondi's response was swift, cutting, and delivered with a wink. "Oh, I'm sure they're really crying over those tax breaks, Thomas. It must be such a burden for them to have a little extra money to reinvest in the economy and create jobs. But hey, let's not focus on facts when we can just make political points, right?" The room once again erupted in laughter. Bondi's ability to mix policy with humor had reached a new level of finesse, and even Reynolds seemed to realize he was out of his depth. As the debate neared its conclusion, Bondi's dominance was clear. She had outmaneuvered Reynolds at every turn, using her wit, her mastery of policy, and her unwavering confidence to dismantle every argument thrown her way. She hadn't just won the debate. She had made it her own personal stage, turning every moment into a showcase of her political acumen and comedic timing. As the final question was asked, the moderators attempted to steer the conversation back to civility and unity. "We've had a spirited debate tonight, but in the end, both of you are here to represent what's best for America. So, in closing, tell us why you think your vision is the right one for the future." Bondi took a deep breath, composed herself one last time, and delivered a final, powerful statement. "I believe America's future is bright. We are a country built on the principles of freedom, opportunity, and respect for the rule of law. Under President Trump, we've made great strides in securing our borders, growing the economy, and ensuring that every American has the chance to succeed. We're not perfect, but we are always striving to be better. And that's the vision I'm working for. The vision of an America where hard work, respect for the law, and freedom reign supreme." The audience erupted into applause. Reynolds, beaten but still gracious, offered a polite nod, but it was clear who had won the night. Pam Bondi had not only demonstrated her political prowess, but she had also proven that humor, when wielded correctly, could be just as effective as any policy argument. As the debate ended and the cameras cut to the aftermath, Bondi stood tall, a satisfied smile on her face. The night had been hers, and the entire country had just witnessed one of the most entertaining and informative debates in recent memory. The debate had concluded, but the effects of Pam Bondi's performance were far from over. News outlets across the country exploded with commentary on the night's events. The hashtag Bondi Roasts Reynolds was trending on social media, with millions of people sharing clips of her hilarious comebacks and sharp policy rebuttals. Bondi's name was on everyone's lips, and the media coverage had solidified her status as the night's clear winner. Within moments of the debate's conclusion, Bondi's phone buzzed with a barrage of messages. Her team, her friends, and even her political allies were flooding her with congratulations. But amidst the praise, there was one message that stood out. "Pam, you were fantastic tonight. You've got the attention of the nation now. Let's talk strategy for the next steps. The media is already looking for your next move." It was from her campaign manager, Mark, who had been watching from the sidelines and tracking the social media buzz. Pam smiled as she read the message. She was well aware that her performance had gone beyond a simple political debate. It had become a viral event, something that could elevate her profile even further. But she wasn't interested in letting her success go to her head. For her, it wasn't just about the applause. It was about the message she had been able to communicate to the American people. As her team began planning her next moves, Bondi took a moment to reflect on the debate. She had been under pressure, facing not just political opponents but the weight of expectations. The media had long expected her to rise to the occasion, but many had wondered if she could truly hold her own against the liberal talking points that had been dominating the airwaves. After all, she had been known as a fierce advocate for conservative causes, but now, more than ever, she was being thrust into the national spotlight. The next day, Bondi appeared on several talk shows to discuss the debate. Her humor and charm were undeniable, but it was her deep understanding of policy that truly won over the hosts. One morning show host, clearly still in awe of her performance, asked, "Pam, how do you manage to keep such a cool head while delivering those fiery responses? And can we expect to see more of this in the future?" Bondi chuckled, her signature smile lighting up the screen. "I think the key is staying focused on the issues. You can't get distracted by the noise. I've been in politics long enough to know that people want results, not just rhetoric. If you can speak to the truth of the matter and throw in a little humor to keep things light, that's how you win the conversation." Her words resonated with audiences everywhere. Bondi's ability to blend humor with substance was a rare talent in the often divisive and polarized world of American politics. Viewers were captivated by her authenticity, her wit, and her command of the issues at hand. But as the days passed, the excitement surrounding the debate grew even more intense. Social media was flooded with memes, GIFs, and clips of her roasting Reynolds. Conservative pundits hailed her as a hero, while liberal commentators tried to downplay her success. The debate had become a full-blown phenomenon, and Bondi's performance was being hailed as a masterclass in political debating. Pam Bondi has proven that humor and policy expertise can go hand in hand, said one political analyst on a popular cable news show. In an era where debates often descend into chaos and name-calling, Bondi's ability to make her case with clarity and a smile has set her apart from the pack. If she keeps this up, she could be a force to be reckoned with in the future. As the praise continued to pour in, Bondi's campaign strategy began to take shape. She knew that the debate had given her an incredible platform, but she also understood that maintaining momentum would require careful planning. Her team focused on leveraging the media buzz to build support for her policy positions, organizing town halls, and reaching out to voters in key battleground states. Her next appearance was set for a televised town hall, where she would engage directly with constituents and answer their questions on everything from healthcare to economic policy. The town hall was a critical moment, and Bondi knew that it was her chance to show the American people that she wasn't just a skilled debater, but also a leader who could connect with people on a personal level. Despite the pressure, Bondi remained calm. She had faced far more challenging moments in her career, and she wasn't about to let the spotlight overwhelm her. As she prepared for the town hall, she focused on staying grounded and true to her message. The political landscape was changing rapidly, and the American people were hungry for authenticity. Bondi was determined to give them just that. Meanwhile, Reynolds, still reeling from the defeat in the debate, faced a different kind of challenge. He had expected to use the debate as an opportunity to boost his standing in the polls, but instead, it had backfired. His performance had been lackluster, and the public was not forgiving. Bondi's viral moments had overshadowed his talking points, and now he was scrambling to recover. In an attempt to salvage his reputation, Reynolds made a series of public appearances, doubling down on his liberal platform. But the damage had already been done. People weren't interested in his rhetoric anymore. They were captivated by Bondi's refreshing mix of humor and policy knowledge. Reynolds had lost the narrative, and it seemed unlikely that he could regain it. As the weeks went by, Bondi's popularity continued to soar. She was invited to speak at major conservative rallies, and her speeches were met with standing ovations. But despite all the attention and praise, she remained focused on the road ahead. Her team had been working tirelessly to craft a message that resonated with voters across the political spectrum. She wasn't interested in becoming a political celebrity. She wanted to make real change. Bondi knew that the future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of excitement about what lay ahead. The debate had been a turning point, a moment that could launch her into a new chapter of her political career. But she also understood that this was just the beginning. The road to the White House was long, and only time would tell if she could turn the momentum from her debate victory into a lasting legacy. Pam Bondi woke up the morning after her whirlwind media tour with a clear sense of purpose. The praise for her performance in the debate was still pouring in, but she wasn't one to rest on her laurels. She knew that, in the world of politics, nothing was guaranteed. The next step would be critical. The media had crowned her the debate's victor, but that didn't mean she could relax. There was still a long way to go, and she needed to solidify her momentum. Her team had already started planning the next phase of her campaign. They'd capitalized on her recent viral success, arranging speaking engagements in key swing states where her message of economic growth and personal freedom resonated most. Bondi wasn't just building a following. She was cultivating an army of supporters who would back her vision for a stronger, more prosperous America. One of the first stops on her tour was in Ohio, a state crucial to both her campaign and her larger strategy. As she arrived at the venue, a large auditorium filled with hundreds of enthusiastic supporters, she could feel the energy in the air. The atmosphere was electric, and it reminded her of why she'd entered politics in the first place: to serve the American people. Before she took the stage, Bondi's campaign manager, Mark, briefed her on the latest polling data. The numbers were promising. Her approval ratings were higher than they had been just a few weeks ago, with a noticeable surge in independent voters who were drawn to her direct style and commitment to pragmatic solutions. Still, she couldn't afford to be complacent. There were tough battles ahead, and Ohio was just the first of many states where she would have to prove herself. As she stepped up to the podium and looked out over the sea of faces, Bondi felt a surge of gratitude. She'd worked hard to get to this point, and now it was time to let her voice be heard. The audience quieted, hanging on her every word, eager to hear the next chapter in her political journey. "I'm here today because I believe in the future of this country," she began, her voice steady and confident. "I believe that America is a place where opportunity is available to everyone, no matter who you are or where you come from. I believe that we've already seen tremendous progress under President Trump, but we can't stop now. We've got to keep fighting to make sure every American has the chance to succeed." Her words were met with loud applause, and Bondi smiled, knowing she was connecting with her audience. She continued, speaking about her vision for the economy, for the future of healthcare, and for strengthening national security. Each policy point was met with nods of agreement from the crowd. But what really resonated with them, what got the loudest cheers, was when she took a moment to reflect on her performance in the debate. "You all saw what happened a few weeks ago," she said with a wink. "I went up against a liberal TV host, and I think it's safe to say I won. But it wasn't just about winning a debate. It was about standing up for what's right. It was about showing that when we fight for American values, we can win every time." The crowd erupted into applause, and Bondi knew she had them in the palm of her hand. This was her moment to cement herself as not only a fierce defender of conservative principles but also a relatable figure who could stand toe-to-toe with the best of them, whether it was in a debate, on the campaign trail, or in the halls of Congress. As she finished her speech, Bondi was surrounded by supporters who clamored to shake her hand, take pictures, and express their gratitude. It was clear to her that the American people were eager for a leader who could not only talk the talk but walk the walk. They weren't looking for more empty promises. They wanted someone who could deliver results, and she was determined to be that person. But as Bondi made her way to the next rally, the reality of her situation began to set in. The political landscape was as divided as ever, and every move she made was being scrutinized by both supporters and detractors. She knew she would face fierce opposition from liberals who would stop at nothing to undermine her success. But Pam Bondi was no stranger to opposition. She had spent years fighting for the causes she believed in, and she wasn't about to let a few criticisms derail her campaign. In the coming weeks, Bondi's team worked tirelessly to expand her reach. They focused on digital advertising, targeted outreach in battleground states, and strategic interviews with conservative media outlets. Her team also began discussing her next big step, a major national address where she could lay out her vision for the future of the country, just as she had done in Ohio, but on a larger stage. As she prepared for her next big event, Bondi's thoughts turned to the upcoming midterm elections. She knew that they would be a pivotal moment in shaping the future of American politics. The stakes were higher than ever, and she needed to continue proving that her message was the right one for the country. Her strategy was clear. Stay focused on the issues, never let the noise of the media distract her, and, most importantly, continue to engage with the American people. She had already gained a reputation for her sharp wit, her humor, and her ability to defuse even the most heated political debates. But now it was time to show the world that she was more than just a debater. She was a leader. Bondi's next appearance was at a rally in Florida, her home state, where her political career had begun. The anticipation in the air was palpable. The venue was packed, and Bondi was ready to once again showcase her ability to connect with people on a personal level. As she stood on stage, looking out at the sea of supporters, she was filled with a sense of pride. This was her moment to continue the fight for a better America. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for her family, for her community, and for the country she loved. But no matter how much success she achieved, Bondi knew that the journey wasn't over. Every speech, every rally, and every debate was a stepping stone towards something greater. She had proven herself in the ring, but now she had to prove she could lead with strength, integrity, and vision. The road ahead would be long, but Bondi was ready. The stage was set, and she was prepared to take on whatever challenges came her way. With the support of her team, her family, and her ever-growing army of loyal followers, Pam Bondi was ready to make history. Pam Bondi was quickly becoming one of the most talked-about figures in American politics. Her viral debate performance had catapulted her into the national spotlight, and she was receiving more media attention than she ever could have imagined. But as her popularity grew, so did the pressure. She knew that her every word, every action, was now under a microscope, and the stakes were higher than ever. As she continued to campaign across the country, Bondi found herself facing new challenges. One of the most significant hurdles came in the form of a growing movement among the liberal elite to challenge her political stance and the conservative ideals she represented. Her recent success had clearly ruffled some feathers, and they were intent on undermining her at every turn. One such challenge came in the form of a new ad campaign launched by a prominent liberal PAC, Political Action Committee. The ad, which aired in key battleground states, depicted Bondi in an unflattering light. It distorted her words from the debate, twisting them into something entirely different. The ad aimed to paint her as out of touch with everyday Americans and accused her of being a pawn of the Trump administration. Bondi wasn't surprised. She knew that this was part of the game. The attacks would come, but it was how she responded that would define her. As the ad gained traction in the media, her team scrambled to develop a response. Bondi didn't take the bait immediately. Instead, she used the moment to her advantage. At her next rally, she addressed the ad head-on. The crowd was filled with anticipation as Bondi took the stage, and she wasted no time diving into the issue. "You may have seen some ads lately," she began, her voice calm but firm. "Let me tell you something. I'm not running for office because I want to be popular with the media or the so-called elites. I'm running because I believe in America. I believe in the people. And I believe that it's time for Washington to stop playing games and start working for you." The crowd erupted in applause, and Bondi's message hit home. She wasn't going to allow anyone, liberal or conservative, to define her narrative. She was going to define it herself. The attack ads only seemed to make her stronger. In fact, they seemed to rally her supporters even more. Social media exploded with memes and posts showing her standing tall in the face of adversity. Conservative pundits were quick to praise her for her ability to stay composed under pressure and for turning the tables on the attack ads. But there were more challenges on the horizon. As Bondi's visibility grew, so did the criticism from the left. The liberal media, which had already been vocal in its disdain for her, ramped up its attacks. Talk show hosts and pundits began to scrutinize every aspect of her past, hoping to find something that could discredit her rise. Bondi's past as Florida's Attorney General was scrutinized once again. Liberal commentators dug into her record, pointing to controversial decisions she had made during her tenure. They questioned her stance on issues like criminal justice reform and consumer protection. The attacks were fierce, but Bondi remained unshaken. She had weathered similar storms before, and this time would be no different. "Let me make something clear," Bondi said during an interview when asked about the renewed scrutiny. "I've always fought for what I believe is right. Sometimes that means making tough decisions, but that's what leadership is about. I stand by my record, and I'll continue to fight for the values that make this country great." Her resolute response struck a chord with her supporters. They appreciated her transparency and her willingness to stand up for her principles, no matter the cost. It was becoming clear that the more the media attacked her, the more her popularity surged among conservative voters. But Bondi knew that the battle was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Meanwhile, Reynolds, her debate opponent, continued to struggle in the aftermath of the debate. His campaign had suffered a significant blow, and his chances of regaining the momentum were dwindling. The liberal media had tried to rally behind him, but they couldn't seem to shake the image of Bondi's viral performance. Every time they tried to shift the conversation back to Reynolds, the conversation would inevitably turn to Bondi's razor-sharp responses and her political expertise. Reynolds' campaign manager was in damage control mode, desperately trying to salvage what was left of their momentum. Bondi's campaign team, on the other hand, was working tirelessly to keep the momentum going. They knew that Bondi's rise was no fluke. It was the result of hard work, careful strategy, and the appeal of her no-nonsense approach to politics. One of the next big challenges for Bondi came in the form of the upcoming national convention. It was a moment that could either make or break her. The convention would be her chance to address the nation, to lay out her vision for the future, and to solidify her place in the political landscape. She would be up against some of the most seasoned politicians in the country, but Bondi was ready for the challenge. In the days leading up to the convention, Bondi worked with her speechwriters to craft a message that would resonate with voters across the country. She knew that she needed to strike the right balance between policy substance and emotional appeal. It wasn't enough to simply be sharp and witty. She needed to connect with the American people on a deeper level. As she walked onto the convention stage, Bondi took a deep breath. The lights were blinding, the crowd was deafening, and the stakes had never been higher. But she didn't flinch. She walked to the podium, looked out over the sea of faces, and began to speak. "America is at a crossroads," she said, her voice carrying across the auditorium. "We can choose the path of divisiveness and fear, or we can choose the path of unity and strength. We can choose to let Washington continue its games, or we can take control of our future and create an America where everyone has the opportunity to succeed." Her words were met with a roar of applause. It was clear that Bondi had struck the right chord. She continued with her vision for the future, one of economic growth, strong national security, and a government that truly worked for the people. Her message was clear, concise, and powerful. By the time she finished, the room was on its feet, cheering for the candidate who had proven time and again that she could not only win debates but also win hearts and minds. As she left the stage, Bondi knew that this was the moment that would define the course of her campaign. The road ahead was still full of obstacles, but with each victory, each challenge, she was one step closer to achieving her ultimate goal. The future was uncertain, but Bondi was ready for whatever came next. As Pam Bondi's campaign moved forward, the intensity of the race reached a fever pitch. The national convention speech had given her a commanding presence, and now she was in full swing as the election loomed. The debates had only been the beginning, and Bondi was gearing up for the final stretch of a battle that would determine the future of the country. Every day felt like a sprint, every hour a potential opportunity to either win or lose critical ground. Bondi had prepared herself for this, and her team was in overdrive, making sure that no stone was left unturned. But there was an undeniable shift in the tone of the race. As Bondi's popularity grew, so did the media scrutiny. The attacks on her record, her policies, and her very character came from every direction. Some were expected. Criticism of her past as Florida's Attorney General was nothing new, but others were personal, more calculated, and designed to create division among her supporters. The Democratic establishment was getting desperate. They had tried to paint her as the villain, as someone out of touch with the everyday American, but nothing seemed to stick. So they turned to more underhanded tactics. Fake news stories were planted, social media bots began to spread false claims about her involvement in scandals, and her opponents escalated their attacks in every corner of the political spectrum. The left-wing media, unable to tear her down with facts, resorted to sensationalism. They targeted everything, from her stance on immigration to her alleged ties to corporate donors. The campaign's response to these attacks was swift and strategic. But each story seemed to gain traction, and the truth became increasingly harder to find. Bondi, however, wasn't one to back down from a fight. She had built her career on overcoming obstacles, and she knew that the way to win this battle was to stay focused on the issues and keep speaking directly to the people. She had never been afraid of a fight, and now, more than ever, she had to prove that the media couldn't dictate the narrative. At a pivotal rally in Pennsylvania, a state that had become increasingly crucial to her success, Bondi addressed the mounting attacks head-on. The crowd that day was the largest she had seen in months. The energy was palpable, and her supporters were visibly more motivated than ever. Bondi could feel the momentum shifting in her favor. "I know some of you are hearing things about me that aren't true," she began, her voice calm but firm. "But let me tell you, there is one thing that I can promise you. I am fighting for the future of this country. I am fighting for the hardworking men and women who deserve better than the swamp that has been running Washington for decades." The audience erupted in cheers, and Bondi's confidence surged. She wasn't going to let the smear campaign distract her. She was going to keep doing what she had always done. Speak the truth and fight for what she believed in. "Every time they try to tear me down, I know that it's not just about me," she continued. "It's about all of us. It's about the future of this nation. The elites, the establishment, they want to keep us divided. They want to keep us distracted. But we're not going to let them win. We're going to stay united, we're going to fight for what's right, and together we're going to make America stronger than ever before." As the crowd cheered, Bondi knew she had once again connected with the people who had been with her from the beginning. The stakes were high, and she could sense that the race was coming down to the wire. Every state, every vote, every swing district was now more important than ever, and she was ready to give everything she had to make sure that victory was hers. The final night before Election Day arrived, and Pam Bondi stood in front of a packed auditorium, reflecting on the incredible journey that had led her to this moment. The late-night rallies, the endless speeches, the debates, every step of the way had been a testament to her resilience, determination, and unwavering belief in her vision for America. Tomorrow, voters would make their decision, and Bondi had done everything she could to ensure that she would be the one they chose. The media, however, was abuzz with speculation. Polls were showing a tight race in key battleground states, and pundits on both sides of the aisle were forecasting a nail-biting election. The final hours before the polls closed were tense. Her campaign team was huddled in war rooms across the country, tracking voter turnout, checking in with local offices, and strategizing on the best ways to close out the final push. Bondi had spent the day speaking with voters and supporters. There was no mistaking the passion in their eyes, the belief that change was within their grasp. For every attack that had been thrown her way, for every negative ad and harsh critique, she knew that there were thousands of people out there who saw her for what she truly was, a fighter for the American people. As night fell, Bondi was at a rally in Florida, the state where her political career had started, and it was clear that this state would be pivotal to her chances of winning. The energy in the room was electric, a mix of anticipation and hope. She had delivered every speech with the same unwavering conviction, and now it was up to the voters to decide. "Tomorrow is the day that we take back our country," Bondi told the crowd, her voice filled with emotion. "Tomorrow, we vote for our children's future, for our freedom, for the values that make this country great. We are not going to let Washington, D.C. continue to be a place of corruption and deceit. We are going to fight for the America we know and love." The applause was deafening, and Bondi felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had worked tirelessly for this moment, and now, as the campaign drew to a close, she could only hope that all of her efforts would culminate in the victory she so passionately believed in. As the final hours ticked down, Bondi retreated to her hotel suite. She sat quietly, surrounded by her closest team members, reflecting on the campaign's highs and lows, the personal sacrifices, the long nights, the moments of doubt. She had pushed through them all, driven by a singular mission, to serve the people of America. When Election Day finally arrived, Pam Bondi was ready. It was more than just a campaign. It was a mission to restore integrity, prosperity, and the promise of a brighter future for all Americans. Whatever the result, she knew she had given it her all. The polls closed, the votes were counted, and the country held its breath.